And the next question is who will replace Biden? And I really think this is, I mean, listen, I don't know who would be my favorite candidate to replace Biden in a fantasy world, but I haven't had the time to engage in fantasy. The only person who really can do this in terms of like, because we're 4 months out. I mean, we are 4 months out from an election, right? I mean, this is we're in July. The election's in November.
Hey, parliamentary systems do it. They, they have shorter elections. It's just into ardor
but they don't have the kind of money that we're talking about. And so you've got $92 million in the bank in the Biden campaign. There is only one person who is eligible to get that money on day one, and that is Kamala Harris. There is nobody else who is eligible under federal election laws to get that money. The money can go through different various super PACs and whatnot to support another candidate, but that super PACs, they do not get the discounted TV rates. There is only one potential candidate right now who has an apparatus that pre-exists today. And that is Kamala Harris. She was part of that ticket. There's only one person who's really been on the ballot to some extent in all these primaries. That's Kamala Harris. If you wait until August to do some type of open convention, aside from all of the other sort of ridiculousness around it, you are giving that candidate only 3 months to campaign.
Let me read this quote from Summer Lee, who is the first member, I believe, of the squad or squad adjacent to weigh in on this, which is, by the way, smart, because if AOC or Ilhan Omar is saying, let's replace Biden, that makes it look ideological and probably scares some of the centrist Biden people away. But Summer Lee had this quote about Kamala Harris. She said, maybe folks don't want to hear, but we have timing that is running out. Time is not on our side. We have a few months to do a monumental task. It's not cheap and it's not easy. If our president decides this is not a pathway forward for him, we have to move very quickly. There's not going to be time for a primary. That time is past. The vice president is the obvious choice. She's sitting right there. She's already been in the White House and has the name recognition and has been on the trail, and the optics of pushing aside a black woman, it's not good. She said that on the radio this morning. So I agree with that sentiment. In an ideal world, as you're saying, Sam, would I prefer a different candidate? All joking about being in the K-Hive now aside, of course. I think Kamala Harris has issues as a stump speech communicator. I don't necessarily think she's the strongest person ideologically. I think she's a bit of a sieve and somebody who will go with where the Democratic Party is going. But there could be worse options. There could be worse options than a narrative that's crafted about electing the first female president in a year where abortion is on the ballot. Yep. There could be worse options than somebody who did co-sponsor Medicare for All when she got into the Senate. She walked away from it in the campaign, but at least she wasn't taking the Biden approach at the time. There could be worse people than who have had the experience of systemic racism, and she talked about busing. There could be worse people. And I know that there's a lot of dismissiveness towards her, but it's also about the negative partisanship versus Trump. And she can articulate issues. She can speak to the abortion topic, and she can be at least somebody who can campaign.
He'll drive Trump crazy too.
And let's be clear. It's not like there's huge expectations for her as a candidate. There's just not. I mean, she's not, it's not like there's surprise things that are going to come out. I mean, she really has, I think, more upside than downside. There's a couple of questions on the IMs. If Biden were to end his campaign, would he remain president throughout the year? I personally, I think it's very important that Biden stay in office, because if he steps down and Harris becomes president, while she has, I guess, some sense of incumbency, that means that there's no vice president. that there's a process that needs to happen in terms of vice president, is my understanding. And then you would have Mike Johnson, literally the next person in line of succession. And I don't think that's a healthy scenario. Stranger things have happened.
And I think there's things on Biden's sort of desk that she might want the lame duck to deal with rather than her getting right into
100%.
office and being responsible for all of it.
And it seems perfectly fine that you can say something to the effect of, I don't have the stamina to both campaign and be president. I want to dedicate myself to the presidency, get us out of this inflation. We're wrapping it up, whatever it is. That's the nature of the story. Somebody else asked if Kamala stepped aside, is there some type of succession for the campaign apparatus and for the money? Certainly not for the money under federal election law. Right. Her name is on the essentially the forms. So she can get that money. Nobody else can, at least not in a direct way.
So when she ran in 2019, 2020, she said that she'd eliminate the filibuster to pass the Green New Deal. That was one thing that she did say. She also has been leaking to the press during Biden's support for the genocide in Gaza that she wanted a more sympathetic approach towards Palestinians, which I think was strategic on her part. I'm giving a rosy picture, but just take yourself back to 2020, and we all know who the two best candidates in that primary were, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, in that order. Who was the third person you would have preferred in that situation? Mayor Pete? Kamala? Right? I don't know. I mean, she's not the worst one that was running.
I would have been worried she would have lost, but yeah. I mean, at this point, I think she's a better candidate than Biden is, so...
In terms of ideology,
I think, from my perspective, that's what it really comes down to. Is that I don't know that Harris's stock has risen in my mind as much as Biden's ability to do this has dropped, and I think it's a different electorate on some level that Biden's going for. But I suspect that Harris's strength with unions may be stronger than we think it is. She spent a lot of time sort of in the background dealing with this union stuff. It's one of those situations where it doesn't seem like there's a lot of options either way. I mean,
no, I agree. I'm just trying to she's been relatively low profile, and look, she was a cop. The marijuana convictions, horrible, and there's a lot there, but she's basically just a standard Democrat.
Yeah,
she's basically just a standard Democrat, and I think you can, as I said earlier, the way to talk about abortion makes much more sense when she's out there.
Well, that's the thing, is Trump will have to return serve finally.
Yep.
And I mean, there's just benefit of him having to talk with somebody who can actually be fluent on a topic like abortion.
It's also going to be interesting to see how he deals with her being a black woman. Mm-hmm. There was a theory, and I think certainly, understandable on some level in the wake of Trump in 2020, that you want the most sort of bland type of person for Trump to run against, so that he could not inspire the anti-immigrant, the misogynist, the racist element of his support, and that worked in the context of Biden. It might be also interesting. I mean, certainly he was able to exercise a certain amount of, or draw on a certain type of misogyny when it came to Hillary Clinton. I mean, no doubt. But people have to remember, there was a part of the reason why I felt that she was not as a candidate, right? Never mind in terms of what her CV said, but as a candidate, she was uniquely ill-suited to go against Donald Trump, was because there was literally a 40 or 30 year cottage industry demonizing her, taking her to a different level. The misogyny was so intertwined with people's perspective of Clinton. And frankly, I just don't know that you have the ability to develop those narratives around Harris in the same way, because he only had 4 months. I mean, this is like one advantage any Democratic comes in is that you don't have the same amount of time to develop the negatives that you otherwise would. And
especially if you're a weak campaigner, the 4 months is actually kind of a heaven sent.
And increase the tension on it. Yeah.
Well, if there's a theory that a generic Democrat can win, you got 4 months, and they're all pretty generic Democrat at this point for most of the population.
Well, so to bolster your point, I think the misogyny about Hillary Clinton, it's all about, do you have wiggle room to create your own narrative about somebody? Hillary Clinton, as you say, after 30 years of Fox News, saying she killed Seth Rich or whatever the case, or that she stood by her man
Vin Foster,
when there was this embarrassing
Whitewater.
This embarrassing sex scandal too, which also increased internalized misogyny with a lot of suburban white women. I just want to point that out there. There was everyone already had their opinion on Hillary Clinton by the time she entered the race. I saw numbers on CNN last night. Something like 7 or 8% of voters polled had no opinion of Trump or Biden. They were similar in terms of no opinion had. The number for Kamala Harris was 22%. And when we're talking about the negative partisanship and the way that people feel about things like January 6th, how that polls with independent voters, how abortion polls with independent voters, the point is that it's an opportunity, and it doesn't have the baggage that you describe about Hillary Clinton, because some of the dismissive of Kamala Harris out of hand, I feel like I don't love the undertones, even though, again, I think like from a leftist perspective, she's a flawed candidate, but we're talking about how can we defeat Trump in the fall. It's really this reflexive, like, oh, she's going to bring out the misogynists and the racists. Well, that's an argument for like never running a woman or never running a person of color, because right now Trump's as weak as possible. And so do I think she's the strongest candidate? Not necessarily. But do I think this is one of the best environments for a generic Democrat to win a presidential election in theory? Yeah.
And look, I mean, the reality is, and I've alluded to this in the past, if Biden or Democrat, whomever runs, garners even close to the same percentage spreads that they did in 2020. So in other words, like the cohort that Biden leaned on, the younger cohort, has grown exponentially just because of the nature of where we are in terms of the size of the generations. And the one that Trump was most successful in has shrunken. And I would also argue that that difference in cohorts has also been a diminishment in the number of voting racists and misogynists. I mean, I think progress moves slowly. And certainly the more younger people we have who are make up a larger part of the voting electorate, the less that electorate becomes racist or misogynist. That doesn't mean that we don't have misogyny or racism in the country, and that in many respects it's systemic. But when it comes to elections, it may have a little bit less salience than it did in 2020. And again, we're talking this election, the popular vote may be a different story. But when it comes to the electoral vote, we could be talking about 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 votes, maybe tops, difference between someone who wins the presidency and doesn't over the Electoral College. So it's a bizarre, we're in a bizarre world. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.